Hello and welcome to In Depth. My name is Aditi Nagpal Girotra. Our subject today is climate protection. India has been in the forefront of an intense battle to protect the environment by reducing its carbon footprint. To this end, it has invested heavily in low carbon intensive technologies, successfully switched to renewable energy, and stepped up its efforts to protect forests. In the process, it earned hundreds of millions of carbon credits or emission reduction certificates that are also called CERs. Under the prevailing Kyoto Protocol climate agreement, carbon credits are used in market-based system of carbon trading. Carbon trading allows countries and companies to sell their carbon credits for money. In December, the UN Climate Change Conference or COP25 was held in Madrid. COP25 was to have finalized rules for a new global carbon market under the Paris Agreement. For India, one of the goals and focus at the Madrid conference was to win the right to sell its hard-earned carbon credits. But the talks that concluded in Madrid on 15 December ended without agreeing on the rules for future carbon trading. Our focus today is this whole system of carbon trading. What was its original intention? And how did the system function over the years, and what has been its impact? Carbon trading is a system to limit carbon emissions by countries and allow them to achieve their emission targets by buying and selling of carbon credits. Under carbon trading, a country which has higher carbon emissions can purchase the right to emit more from the country with lesser emissions. Here are all the details.
Carbon emissions trading is the process of buying and selling permits and credits to emit carbon dioxide. The system is aimed at reducing greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming, particularly carbon dioxide emitted by burning fossil fuels. To tackle climate change, carbon trading has become the policy instrument of choice among governments. Under the carbon trading system, a country having more emissions of carbon is able to purchase the right to emit more, and the country having lesser amounts of emissions sells the right to emit carbon to other countries or entities. This enables the countries or polluting entities emitting more carbon to fulfill their carbon emission requirements.
So fundamentally, carbon trading is a process which is a market-driven process, wherefore you can actually almost get permission to pollute if you actually want to offset 1 ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent of gases. So it's a mechanism that was primarily developed to look at if there is someone who is polluting, can actually get some bit of carbon credit if wants to offset it in some way or the other. So the entire carbon trading process or carbon credit process was a mechanism that was developed globally, and there were these marketplaces that were actually developed globally to look at offsetting of your carbon, of your footprint. So in a way, polluters got a license to continue to pollute if they actually offset that by doing certain activities in that sense.
Carbon emissions trading works by setting a quantitative limit on the emissions produced by countries. Across the world, cap and trade system is being used for effective carbon trading at regional, national and international levels. Under the scheme, governments or intergovernmental bodies like the European Commission hand out carbon permits. The governments set the cap across a given industry or the whole economy. It also decides the penalties for violations. Countries or entities that do not have enough allowances to cover their emissions either make reductions or buy another entity's spare credits. Countries or entities with extra allowances can sell them or bank them for future use. Cap and trade allows the market to determine a price on carbon, and that price drives investment decisions. Cap and trade is often preferred over carbon tax in meeting specified emissions target, as it provides a high level of certainty about future emissions but not about the price. The carbon trading system is also a central element of the UNFCCC's Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol is an international treaty adopted in Japan on 11th December 1997. It came into force on 16th February 2005. The Kyoto Protocol implemented the objective of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to reduce the onset of global warming by reducing greenhouse gas concentrations. The framework is based on the scientific consensus that global warming is occurring, and it is extremely likely that human-made carbon dioxide emissions have predominantly caused it. There are currently 192 parties to the protocol.
Kyoto Protocol also similarly, when the entire carbon trading process began, or the entire system of carbon credit began, it actually gave permission for people to accumulate credit points. And that's where countries like India and many other developing countries actually accumulated a lot of credit points, and they actually were able to use it in international market or sell those credit points in international market. And that's what Kyoto Protocol emission control or emission trading was all about, that a particular company was allowed to really further its emissions if they were able to buy it. So right now in India also, if you look at several companies, organizations, have actually accumulated a lot of carbon credit and through Kyoto Protocol process. But right now, through the new conversation that is actually happening globally and what happened recently in Madrid right now, it was actually about reducing. Many people are saying that cannot be furthered. Those credit points or carbon credit points cannot be extended beyond a point. We need immediate action if we don't want to hit the 1.5 degree levels right now.
The Paris Agreement adopted in December 2015 also provides a framework to govern the international transfer of mitigation outcomes that includes carbon trading. The Paris Agreement is an agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. It also calls for enhanced support from developed countries to assist developing countries to do so. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement outlines the framework for a global carbon market. While the UN framework and protocols aim to tackle climate change, events like bushfires in Australia or massive fires in Amazon rainforests keep pushing the goals backward. While the Brazilian government faced flack last year to allow clearing of land for crops and cattle in the forest area, Australian government's pro-coal campaign is under fire right now in light of the Australian bushfires. In November 2019, US President Donald Trump also announced his country's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement on climate change, terming the deal as unfair economic burden imposed on American workers. With inputs from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The last decade has seen worldwide growth of emissions trading systems for climate change mitigation. At present, there are 20 systems covering 27 jurisdictions with an ETS in force. Another 6 jurisdictions are in the process of putting in place their systems that could be operating in the next few years, including China and Mexico. 12 jurisdictions are also considering the role an ETS can play in their climate change policy mix, including Chile, Thailand, and Vietnam. Let's take a look at the benefits that emissions trading systems bring.
Accumulation of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere increases with economic activities, and this increase has adverse effects on growth and development as well as on global warming, climate changes, and environmental events. In this context, emissions trade or carbon trading is a subject that came into spotlight with the Kyoto Protocol, which aims to minimize the adverse effects of global warming and climate changes caused by greenhouse gas emissions. There are 20 emissions trading systems in operation today at the supranational, national, state, provincial and city levels, with many others under consideration. In 2018, the combined value of ETS worldwide was estimated to be more than $34 billion, while jurisdictions with an operating ETS now generate more than 50% of the global GDP.
So if you look at globally, many companies have actually wanted to offset it. So there are many polluting countries or industries or sectors that have actually looked at offsetting carbon. and trading in carbon. And that's where you actually invest in different kind of technology. A lot of times it's on technology intervention, or also in many ways you actually invest in afforestation activities or carbon neutral activities, or activities that can actually reduce carbon. So this entire market, last several decades we have seen of carbon trading, where companies like India have accumulated a lot of carbon credit or money worth carbon credit from their activities through their low emission technology and everything else. India is in a very, very strong position, because many companies, including the government, has actually invested in low carbon technology and has accumulated a lot of carbon credit in the market.
Let's now take a look at some of the benefits of the emissions trading systems. ETS specifically targets emissions reductions, as can be seen in the systems that are currently operational. Estimates of emissions reductions attribute the EU ETS with 3% of aggregate emissions in Phase 1. But in Phase 2, between 2008 and 2010, when the policy was at its most influential, covered firms in Germany reduced emissions 25 to 28% more than comparable non-covered firms. For the regional greenhouse gas initiative states, results indicate that emissions from covered entities would have been 24% higher in the absence of an ETS. Emissions trading systems also ensure emissions remain at or below the specified emissions cap across covered sectors. Jurisdictions implementing ETS have aimed to adopt progressively declining, credible caps in line with national climate targets, providing a clear emissions reduction path over the mid and long term. ETS also makes economic sense as it delivers cost-effective abatement. A recent study found that compared to other instruments, ETS incurred the lowest costs per ton of abated emissions. ETS also provides the flexibility of choosing where and when to reduce emissions, with the cheapest abatement options being selected first. Moreover, participants can abate emissions when it is most cost-effective to do so. Furthermore, the price signal created through an ETS automatically adapts to changing economic conditions, making emission reductions cheaper when the economy slows and more expensive during periods of growth. Emissions trading systems also facilitate the transition to a low-carbon economy and supports countries in breaking away from a carbon-intensive development path. Results are already visible across many countries. For example, the carbon intensity of California's economy has fallen 33% since it peaked in 2001, while during the same period the state's economy has grown by 37%. ETS also promotes deployment and innovation of low-carbon technology by establishing a carbon price. This changes market conditions to favor low-carbon production processes, products and technologies, and provides an incentive for innovation. Emissions trading systems can be adapted to country-specific contexts, as can be seen with the current 20 systems in operation. The current jurisdictions display notable geographic, political and economic differences, but the ability to adapt the ETS framework means that the policy can be designed to accommodate domestic priorities and fulfill different roles in a jurisdiction's policy mix. With inputs from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
With this, we'll halt in for a quick break, but we'll be back soon. Stay tuned with us.
Among the inseparable identity of Delhi, Qutub Minar has stood by the test of times and elements. Struck by lightning a few times, the 240-meter star suffered damages on its top story. Firoz Shah Tughlaq and Sikandar Lodi had commissioned the repair under the rule, but the damage most remembered was the one in the 19th century, when an earthquake had damaged the topmost story in 1803. The responsibility of the repair was given to a British officer, Major Robert Smith, who had placed a pillared cupola on the top of the minaret. After massive criticism, the then Governor General Harding ordered the cupola to be removed It was reinstalled at the ground level to the east of Qutub Minar. It still remains there, known as Smith's Folly.
Tales that inspire. Stories of social change. A salute to diversity. Promoting public discourse. Events that motivate. Inspiring the innovative spirit. Watch Rajya Sabha television documentaries.
Welcome back. Still with us on In Depth. Carbon trading is designed to reduce future emissions, but loopholes in the policy are leading to more carbon emissions than reducing it. Experts argue that carbon trading is a distraction from the need to shift to a low carbon future. There is an urgent requirement for alternatives to be considered, as the world is running out of time to curb the most serious impacts of carbon emissions.
Also called emissions trading, carbon trading is a market-based tool to limit greenhouse emissions that contribute to global warming. It is the process of buying and selling quotas that allow quota holders the right to emit the equivalent of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So, if a company's or a country's emissions are lower than its quota, it can sell its surplus. If it exceeds its limits, however, it will have to buy additional quota on the market or cut its production. The overall goal of an emissions trading market is to encourage companies and countries to lower their gas emissions in order to minimize the cost. The transfer of allowances from companies who pollute more to those who pollute less will create a trading system that guarantees an overall reduction of carbon emissions. Carbon trading, however, remains highly controversial. Some see it as a dangerous distraction and a false solution to climate change. Its effectiveness has been questioned, with research indicating that it has created more emissions than has actually curtailed. Critics also claim that it is just another means for richer countries to increase their emissions limit at the cost of development in poorer nations. Carbon permit prices also need to be substantial to make it financially attractive for producers to invest in cleaner technologies. But because they are not, it has led to a collapse in the price and no effective reductions in emissions.
There's a lot of controversy that is going on globally in terms of, does carbon trading mean a license to pollute? Because that's where many people, including governments, have actually exploited this entire mechanism of carbon credit or carbon trading. Therefore, they have not reduced their emission, where business is as usual, where pollution continues to stay as it is, and they end up offsetting it by doing something else. And that's where many organizations, including United Nations Environment Program, has clearly said that it's not just about what you end up doing in another end of the planet or another end of your area of influence. It's also very important to know that how are you reducing your own emissions. So it's not just about offsetting it elsewhere, but also doing or changing the core of your own activities. And that's why many companies or many institutions have found an excuse to really think that they can actually buy carbon, and therefore they can continue to do business as usual. In India also, several companies have actually made profit out of it, have actually used this as an excuse, and that's the reason why in Madrid right now there was a lot of conversation around why should this carbon trading not be banned, or in a way, should we actually only look at accumulation of carbon credit, because we need to really reduce carbon emissions by 5 times if we don't want to hit the 1.5 degree Celsius levels.
Policymakers instead offer better solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The first is to set a specific limit that a company cannot exceed. The second option is to introduce a carbon tax where companies pay for the amount of carbon dioxide they produce. Businesses or countries that can reduce emissions will invest in cleaner options as long as it is cheaper than paying the tax.
When carbon credit system was devised, the idea was to offset, the idea was to strike a balance, the idea was to actually have almost like a carbon neutral regime of sorts. And that's where it was linked to climate change, that if you want to reduce climate change, if there's company A that is polluting a lot, they will have to do compensatory activity to really offset that carbon. And so in a way, it was devised to mitigate climate change, it was devised to really balance out impacts of climate change, but it was overtly exploited by many, and that's what many studies show, that climate change cannot be controlled only by offsetting of carbon by doing activity B. You need to change the core activity. So if a mining industry wants to offset its carbon by buying carbon from someone else from a market, which is an easy transactional process, that is not going to affect the climate change regime. They will have to reduce mining activities, or for that matter power sector, what it ends up doing is keep buying carbon credit point. So it's basically about you buy permission, you actually spend money and buy permission to actually continue to pollute, where the issue is to stop pollution or reduce emission in that sense. So it cannot be an excuse that you end up buying credit and still continue to do what you're actually doing, which is basically polluting.
At a time when carbon trading is being strongly promoted as the central solution to climate change, critics continue to stress that it is instead part of the problem, as it remains a dangerous distraction from the need to end fossil fuel use and move to a low-carbon future. The urgent need of the hour is to shift to a low-carbon energy, agriculture, transport and industrial world. With inputs from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
So that's it from us today in In-Depth. We'll be back same time tomorrow with a focus on another key subject. You can also watch our program online on YouTube. Suggestions and feedback about the program are also welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.